Our next speaker this morning will be speaking about the subject of the income tax. You know, the federal government and many states require a large portion of our labor to be given to them, so supposedly they can use that money to defend us, to protect our rights, to protect our freedoms and property. But is there a law that requires us to file and pay income tax? Well, our next speaker has been searching for the law that requires us to file and pay income tax for over 25 years, and he hasn't found one. Is it because he's not looked in the right places, or what? Well, he's become very knowledgeable now, over these years on the subject of the income tax. And he's going to be sharing with you some fundamental basics about the income tax that you don't hear in the media, you don't hear in the government schools. So please help me give a warm hand of welcome to the director and co-founder of the Free Enterprise Society, Mr. Steve Hempfling.
Oh, it's good to be here. Well, how many are you from not from California? There's a few of you. Yeah, that's good. This must be brave. You're brave to come to California. Governor Schwarzenegger is our governor. We vote differently than most states. When we decide on our governor, we always look at how many movies they've been in, that kind of thing. We're going to talk about the income tax today. Anybody heard of that? How many work for the IRS in here? Just one? All right. Of course, in California, we have the Franchise Tax Board, for those who are Californians. They're another agency that's here to help people. I do want to thank, though, Payman and the Freedom Law School for putting on these events. I want to tell you there's a lot of trouble. And I really appreciate and I'm honored to be invited here. So I want to thank Freedom Law School. We're going to talk about the income tax. So let's see if this thing works. All right. Usually I have a screen here, so I apologize for looking behind me. But we do. I want you to know I'm giving you my opinions. I'm not an attorney. There is an attorney going to be speaking on this tomorrow, Tommy Cryer, and I hope you don't miss that. But it is my opinion. This is an American seal. Sometimes I like to show this. We have different terms. They have all kinds of terms that may or may not mean anything, such as left wing and right wing, liberal and conservative. People think they have meanings, but they just change over time. But one of them is left wing and right wing, and they actually came from our seal when the founders designed it, and they kind of thought that the tip of the left wing would be totalitarian government, and the tip of the right wing was anarchy, no government at all. And the founders believed the system they gave us in the Constitution would always put us somewhere in the breast area. So now, the Democrats are on the left wing, right, supposedly? They're like here somewhere. Would that be a fair statement? And the Republicans are probably over here, right? Yeah, wrong. A little farther over. A little farther. Keep going. Yeah, they're about one feather away from the Democratic Party, aren't they? Now, there's Ron Paul Republicans, though. Or Ron Paul, where are they at? I mean, they're a little bit farther to the right. But they're called right-wing radicals, and they are way on the left wing to me. So I find that interesting. Oh, this is nice. It's a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. You may wonder what that has to do with income tax, but I'm going to tell you about it. I'm going to give you a little story about this motorcycle, and it does relate to income tax indirectly, but this is a true story. Some of you may have heard this before, but this was in the Dallas Morning News. A person living in Dallas, Texas, decided that he's going to buy a motorcycle. And he never owned one before, never rode one before, so he goes out and buys the biggest one money can buy, Harley Davidson. Did not know how to ride it. I don't know how he got it home, but he said, I'm going to learn how to ride this in my backyard. So he's riding around his backyard, getting pretty good. And then he decides to head for the patio door. He's going to speed up. He heads for the patio door. He's going to put the brakes on, and because he's feeling pretty good. He gets up to the patio door, tries to put the brakes on. The front wheel comes off the ground. He gives it gas, and it does a wheelie into the living room of his house. Right through the glass, cuts them all up, falls over in the house there. His wife goes, oh, my goodness, so she calls the ambulance. The ambulance comes out and bandages him up, takes him away. She's sitting there with the Harley laying in the middle of the living room now. What do Harleys do when they lay on their side? They leak gasoline and oil. So she's sopping that up with a towel and wringing it out in the toilet and rushes off to the hospital. Anyway, she brings him home that afternoon. He's sitting there in the bathroom looking at all his new war wounds. And he steps over to the toilet to do some business. And he lights a cigarette there. Yeah, well, you're correct. His wife, in her haste to get to the hospital, never did flush that toilet. So it's full of gasoline still. He throws the match in the toilet, and it kind of flashes up, burning this man on many parts of his body. Well, you people are terrible. Don't get in an accident in front of you, huh? No, really. Anyway, his wife, oh my goodness. So she calls the ambulance again. And Dallas is not a small town, but the same ambulance came out, same two paramedics. They came in, bandaged him up, carrying him out on the stretcher, and the one paramedic couldn't help but ask. He said, we were just out here. The wife explained what happened. And the paramedic carrying the head of the stretcher laughed so hard he dropped the stretcher. And the guy broke his collarbone in the fall. That's a definition of a bad day. If you look it up in the dictionary, bad day, it says that guy in Dallas there. And that wasn't me, by the way. But this has a moral to the story, which I'm going to tell you later on in this. So we just have to hang on to that one. We'd like to, and the Free Enterprise Society was founded in 1985. We've been around now 25 years. And one of our main goals is to restore the Constitution of the United States. This is the formula, if you will, that made America the greatest country the world has ever seen. One of the youngest countries in the world, we became financially, industrially, and every other way superior to every other country on this planet when we followed this formula. We are now in debt, worse than any other country in the world. We have unemployment. We have all kinds of problems here. I contend it's because we're not following the Constitution anymore. We've gotten away from it. And so if you're not familiar with the Constitution, I think Freedom Law School may have some free. I'm not sure. We got some on our table over there. If you do nothing else, I hope you at least get the Constitution and read it. This is the rule book. I mean, if you're playing chess or whatever, you usually read the rules. This is the rule book for our country. Justice Hugo Black said, loyalty comes from the love of a good government, not fear of a bad one. Do people fear the government today in this country? I think that's pretty obvious because we should be at the football stadium down the road today. Thomas Jefferson said, if a nation expects to be free and ignorant, it expects something that cannot be. Is that true? Are we ignorant in this country? Thomas Paine, the duty of a patriot is to protect his country from the government. You don't hear politicians talking like that anymore, do you? Is there a difference between government and the country? There sure is. A lot of people don't understand it, though. Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1776. You may recognize that date. We do fireworks and barbecues on that day. But there was a reason for that. And that was because of this document right here was signed on July 4th, 1776. And it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. Who is the governed? People in this room or people in Washington, D.C.? people in this room, absolutely is what the founders intended. But once a person is elected and they have those $3,000 suits on up in the Capitol, they seem to think they own everything, don't they? You been to the Capitol and watch these people? How about the California Capitol? You can watch them there. They're kind of the same way. Once they're elected, they think they're immune from anything that the voters can do. U.S. Constitution, Article 6. This Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. Now, what is the supreme? Is that top or bottom? Top, right? Now, the founders had a higher law. That was their spiritual beliefs. But in our government, this was meant to be the top. And what does that mean? If we continue on, it says the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, and anything in the constitutional laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. Well, that's pretty strong. So if California, of course they would never do this, but if California ever passed a law contrary to the Constitution, what would happen to it? Would it stand or fail? It says right here, if it's to the contrary, it's notwithstanding. It should not stand. It should fail. Does that happen? Who's going to make it fail? It would actually, the courts are supposed to throw them out. Do the courts do that? Not very often. Many Americans don't really know what's going on because they never read the rule book. We continue on with this. The senators and representatives before mentioned, the members of the several state legislatures, and all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution. Can we all agree they're talking about the United States Constitution in this article from the Constitution? I think that's pretty clear. But sometimes I wonder that if they're talking about the Constitution of Cuba. Does Cuba have a constitution? And if they do we want it? Probably not. But elected officials talk about this a lot and don't even read it. So some of you in here have read it. I think probably a lot of you have. Those that haven't will have. And you're going to be smarter in the government than most elected officials once you do that. In California, there's 120 elected officials, and maybe 5 have ever read this document. That's pretty sad. Let's tell you how important the Constitution is. We have a case here, Norton versus Shelby County. It says an unconstitutional act is not law. It confers no rights. It affords no protection. It creates no office. It is in legal contemplation, is inoperative, as though it has never been passed. That's pretty powerful. But it doesn't operate that way today probably because of ignorance. Let's talk about income tax real quick. Everyone's required to file. We know that as soon as we're out of diapers, don't we, in this country? If you live here, you're income tax. Your school teachers tell you, your family tells you, your coworkers tell you all about it. But yet, if you were to ask what law requires me to file, what do you get? You get, well, we all know you're required. Well, I want to see the law that requires me. This was a pretty tough question for him. So looking in the 1040 instruction booklet, I did find this little box. It says, do you have to file? Now, if everyone were required to file automatically, then it would say, you have to file. The word do would be missing. So why would this be in here? Let's see what has a use chart A, B, and C to see if you must file a return. And then it has a tip. Even if you do not otherwise have to file a return, you should file one to get a refund. That's a good tip. Now, is it fair to say that not everyone's required to file? It says, even if you do not otherwise have to file. So there are people that aren't required. Is that fair? Maybe only one is not required, but they put that in here for them. But let's continue on. Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution. No person shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Here's a case talking about the Fifth Amendment and the income tax return. Sullivan versus United States is a 1926 case. There can be no question that one who files a return under oath is a witness within the meaning of the amendment. So are you waiving the Fifth Amendment when you file an income tax return? That's what this case says. It's not Steve Hempfling saying it. And remember, it says under oath. How is a tax return done under oath? Anyone know? Boy, we've got a smart group here. You sign under the penalties of perjury. The courts have determined if you sign something under the penalties of perjury, it's just as if you put your hand on the Bible, swore an oath, and testified against yourself in a case. They can use that information against you in a court of law, and you do not have a Fifth Amendment claim any longer. So any information you put on a tax return, they can use against you. Let's look at the Fourth Amendment. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable search and seizure shall not be violated. Now, there's more to it, but we're talking about papers. The founders thought enough word papers to put it in the Constitution. What kind of papers are they talking about? Newspapers? Toilet paper? Of course not. It had to be business records, family records, photographs. Whatever it was, you had a right to privacy in those records. Do you waive that when you file an income tax return? Absolutely, at least to the extent of any records you make reference to. If you make reference to some bank statement, you've waived your Fourth Amendment right in order for that bank statement. Now the question is, can you be required to waive constitutional birthrights to file an income tax return? So let's look up some definitions. If you're going to waive something, here's a definition: to abandon, to throw away, renounce, repudiate, surrender a claim, privilege, or right. To give up a right or claim voluntarily. In order for one to waive a right, he must do it knowingly and be possessed of the facts. Did the IRS clearly inform you that you're waiving these rights and make a knowing waiver of those rights? They did not. So if you're not doing a knowing waiver, is it a waiver at all? I say by this definition, no. Constitutional right. See, the legislators like to talk about rights all the time. They talk about statutory rights. What are those? Rights, they write a statute giving you a so-called right. What can they do the next day? They can repeal it. Civil rights, you ever heard of those? Martin Luther King did a lot of work on that, and he would actually go into courts over and over again and establish rights through the court system. If a court decision can give you a right, what can happen tomorrow? The next court decision can take that away. This time of year, just coincidentally, the legislatures like to talk about taxpayer rights. What are those? Beats me. I never did figure that one out. But I like constitutional right. And let's see what the definition is. And by the way, we're getting these from law dictionaries. A law dictionary is a little different than Funkenwagnalls or Webster's in that these are used by the courts, and all the terms have a court cases behind them where they were used in the court. Now, most definitions you'll find are be similar there, but not all of them. So if you're dealing with legal questions or law, you should be using a law dictionary. Anyway, it says a right guaranteed to the citizens by the Constitution is so guaranteed as to prevent legislative interference therewith. Can it be any more clear than that? You can't be required to waive this right, take this one right away in order to pay a tax. Have ever you heard the income tax is voluntary? Some of you? Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? I first heard this in about 1979, and I thought the person giving the presentation, the lights were on, but I wasn't sure anybody was home. I said, well, that's ridiculous. And he said, well, Steve, you should call the IRS up. And I'm not suggesting you do this. I'm just telling you what I did. But I did call the IRS up. Let's look at some cases here first. The tax system is based upon voluntary assessment and payment, not upon distraint. Distraint means force. Maybe the IRS has not read this case. How about the California Franchise Tax Board? The Franchise Tax Board relies on its residents to voluntarily file their income tax returns. Now, if you're from California, you can see this is from Roger Lubens, who's in the Filing Compliance Unit. Now, you're probably questioning right now in your mind, saying, well, gee, if it's voluntary, why do we need a Filing Compliance Unit? That's a good question. But anyway, I made this phone call, and I talked to an agent there, an IRS agent, and I said the very next day after that meeting, the very next day I called the agent, And I said, is the income tax voluntary? And I thought they would set me straight. I thought they would say, oh, well, of course it is, and they'd give me, some law or something. And they said, yes, sir, it is. Well, that surprised me right there. And I paused for a moment. Then I said, well, good. I don't want to volunteer anymore. And the agent said something very interesting to me. The agent said, but, sir, you have to volunteer. Well, what do you do to that? I had hung up. I got confused at that point. So maybe voluntary means mandatory. We looked them up in the dictionary. Voluntary compliance. This is good. It's hard to even get through. It's right from the IRS's website. Voluntary compliance. A system of compliance that relies on its individual citizens to report their income freely and voluntarily. Calculate their tax and file on time. Well, how can volunteering on time mean anything if it's voluntary, see? But freely and voluntarily. But that's on their website. In fact, the IRS has over 1,100 references to the voluntary nature of the income tax on their own website. Special Agent's Handbook. This is carried by the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS. They're special agents. They have the guns and the badges. They do the arrests. They search your homes, those kind of things. They're the top of the agent line. And they were given this book one year, and the Mortimer Kaplan was the commissioner at that time, and here's what he had to say. He said, agents, our tax system is based upon individual self-assessment and voluntary compliance. The material contained in this handbook is confidential in character and must not under any circumstance be made available to persons outside this service. To me, this is pretty revealing. But he comes up voluntary compliance, but he has a new one in here called self-assessment. What does that mean? Let me give you a synonym, something very close to self-assessment to give you an idea. At least I think this is close. Self-mutilation. To make sense then, you're doing it to yourself. You sit down and sign a piece of paper that says, I owe you money, and you sign it. If you gave me a note, said I owe Steve Hempfling money and sign it, I could collect it. Self-assessment and voluntary compliance. Well, maybe voluntary means mandatory. Keep looking. Proceeding from the will is on one's own free choice. A system of freely given support. And from the law dictionary, it says unconstrained by interference, unimpelled by another's influence, spontaneous, acting of oneself. Proceeding from the free and unrestrained will of the person. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, that's our income tax system today. 90 million Americans on April 15th go down to the post office freely and voluntarily. That's pretty ridiculous, isn't it? Anybody been down there? Probably most of you have been down there on April 15th at some point. We go down there now sometimes. Everybody's down there. You get to meet everyone in town, and all the media's there, and all the candidates are down there. It may slow down now that they do more online filing, but it's a fun place on April 15th. Okay. I don't know if that's readable. I said the IRS does not tell you that you're waiving these rights, but they're supposed to. This is the Disclosure Privacy Act and Paperwork Reduction Act notice. You'll find it in the 1040 instruction booklet. It's on different pages. It used to be on the inside cover until a lot of groups started talking about it. Now they moved it way in the back. And depending on the book you have, you'll find it in the back somewhere. Now, for most people, if you probably even came across this page, you would have just went to the next page. It did not look too interesting. But this is an important page. I marked the 1, 2, 3, and 4 as marked what I marked, so we're going to blow those up a little bit. The Privacy Act of 1980 required that when we ask you for information, we must first tell you our legal right to ask for the information. Why we're asking for it, how it will be used. We must tell you what will happen to you if we don't receive it, and whether your response is voluntary, required to obtain a benefit, or mandatory under the law. This is important. They're required to tell you this. So I'm interested in what their legal right to ask for this information is. Do they have a legal right to ask for it? That's the number 2 that I marked. our legal right to ask for information is Internal Revenue Code section 6001, 6011, and 6012A and their regulations. They say you must file a return or statement with us for any tax you're liable for. Your response is mandatory under these sections. That sounds like you're required, doesn't it? But does it say that? It says, they say. What was they? Those three sections, right? Maybe we should look at those three sections before we make up our mind. Conveniently, I have them on the screen for you. Internal Revenue Code, section 6001. Every person liable for any tax. Let's just look at the first three words. Can this section make you liable for an income tax when it starts off with every person liable? It cannot. If you are liable for the income tax, then maybe you should read this section. But this doesn't make you liable, in my opinion. 6001, this is it, general rule. When required by regulations. Let's look at the first two words, when required. Does this require you to do something? If it starts off with when required, I don't believe so. Now, if you are required, you maybe should read this section. 6012A. Now, this is a little more confusing, so I'm just going to read the first part. Returns with respect to income taxes under subtitle A shall be made by the following. Every individual having for a taxable year a gross income which equals or exceeds the exemption amount, except the return shall not be required of an individual. What does that mean? Now, you're probably thinking I'm taking this out of context, but there are some internal revenue codes probably out on some of the tables. I don't have any with me this time, but you should look those up because this is just the way it's printed. Then it has a little I and a little 2I, and I don't have the whole section in here. It lists sections that are not required, apparently. And if you're not on the not required list, you must be on the required. Is that how law works? No. And I find it very interesting that every time we find the word required, it's either preceded by the word when or not. Remember it said your response is mandatory under these sections? I can't figure out what responses those sections call for. All right. The paragraph 3 that I marked, if you are filing returns, I want you to know that the IRS is keeping that information private. This is personal financial information you don't even want your brother-in-law to have, so they've got to keep it private. So let's see what it says about in the middle. For example, we may disclose your tax information to the Department of Justice to enforce the tax laws, both civil and criminal, and to cities, states, to District of Columbia, U.S. Commonwealths and possessions, and to certain foreign governments. Well, who's left out? You are. If you want your own tax records, you might have to sue under the Freedom of Information Act to get it. But everybody else can pretty much have it. Number 4 that I marked. Please keep this notice with your records. It may help you if we ask you for additional information. So I think that's true. Now, after I made this phone call, I was not really satisfied with that answer from the IRS. So sometime around April 15th, it was getting close to tax time. I said, well, I'm still not sure what I want to do, so I walked into the IRS. Unannounced, without an appointment, in San Jose, California, in their Gish Road building, which was their big building. And in the big lobby, there was a little desk with one person there, one person. Anyway, I walked up to this and I said, well, listen, I want an appointment. I've been to a meeting that said I'm not required to file, and I'm thinking about that, but I want to talk to your people first, something like that. I don't recommend this. I'm just telling you what I did. This was around 1980. They were very accommodating in that time. They gave me 2 agents in a little room. And I told them what I've been to the meeting, and they said, well, I'm glad you came. They told me they were glad I came by. And then they proceeded to tell me what a great country we live in and to pay our fair share and all the welfare programs and all the things the income tax pays for. They told me all about that. But they never did talk about the law. So then when they were done, I had my briefcase with me. I had the 1040 instruction booklet, and I had an Internal Revenue Code with me, and I kind of went through it with them the way I went through it with you. And both these agents were scratching their head at the end of that. And they said, well, gee, Mr. Hempfling, we can understand why you have a question about this. But they decided my code was wrong or old or something. They said, well, we're gonna go get our own internal revenue code, they said. And I said, well, good idea. So they jumped up and walked off. And they left me there about 10 minutes, and then 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. I was getting a little concerned at this point. And then finally they came back about 45 minutes later, and they said, sheepishly kind of said, well, we can't find our internal revenue code. Well, you would think if you're an IRS agent, they're going to give you one of them, and you should take it home and sleep with it and stuff. You learn it, you know. But the way they said it made me think there's only one in this whole building, and it was lost. This building had 5,000 people working in it, something like that. But they decided my code was wrong, and that's kind of where the meeting ended. Like I would print my own internal revenue code or something. We bought it, bought it from Westlaw or whatever, whoever sells them. So that can help you maybe if you keep these. Talk about that. Now this name always interests me. Disclosure Privacy Act and Paperwork Reduction Act notice looks pretty boring. Took a while to figure it out, but I think I finally figured it out. See, if more people stopped on this page and read the Privacy Act, a lot more people would stop filing income tax returns, and there would be a big paperwork reduction. Well, who is required? Is there anybody in the Internal Revenue Code required to file? We did find a few sections. 5703, liability and method of payment of tax. This might apply to you, but let's see what it says. The manufacturer or importer of tobacco products. Anybody that applies to? Is liable for taxes and under section 5701. It even gives you a section. Here's how it works. Basically, they have to create a liability on a group, and then from that they can impose a tax. Now, 5701 is the imposition of the tax. Cigars, manufacturer in or imported, go through all the tax rates. Tobacco, let's look at another one. 5005, persons liable for a tax. Distiller or importer of distilled spirits shall be liable for taxes imposed thereon by section 5001A1. Does that apply to anybody in here? It's pretty clear who that applies to, isn't it? That's all there is. That's the whole section, one sentence. That creates the liability. And it even tells you what section the imposition of the tax is on. 5001, imposition of a tax. And there's a rate of $13.50 per proof gallon. It goes through all the rates. I don't have to go through all that. There's another section on firearms. Are we getting a pattern here? Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. That ring a bell? Okay. Well, we want to talk about the individual requirement. There's another sound. It might be a little loud, so be ready. Gotta have a build-up. That's what we found for an individual. We can't find any section that creates a liability on the average working American. Now, it doesn't mean one doesn't exist. We just haven't found it. And I did ask the IRS, and they were not very helpful. We've asked Congress, and they have not been very helpful. We've asked the courts, and they have not been very helpful. But they still contend the law exists, even though they have never showed it to anyone. I guess it's a secret. And by the way, this handbook for special agents, I forgot to say this is confidential, as you said, so you got to forget that you saw it. No, seriously, every time we get a secret manual, we like to print it. And we do have these on the table out there if you're interested. Because I don't think the IRS should have any secrets from the people here. So required to file an individual, we can't find any place that creates a liability. Now, we did find this section, and some tax agents and even tax attorneys have sent us to section 1, tax imposed. Now, this is hanging out there, and we can't find a section pointing to it. like we showed you. Creates a liability and then points to a section that imposes a tax. This is just hanging out there, and if you look at it, it appears that it may apply to you. But if you're not liable, it doesn't apply. Liability is very important. Tommy Cryer is going to talk about that in more detail probably tomorrow. But now, if this did require something, it would be required to be in the Privacy Act that we talked about earlier. And the IRS does not use Section 1. They never point us to Section 1. So I don't know why the tax accountants and tax attorneys feel like they have to help the government out, trying to find another section. Senator Root probably said it best. He was a senator when the first income tax was passed in 1913. It was just a few pages, and here's what it had to say. It says, "I guess you will have to go to jail if that is a result of not understanding the income tax law. I shall meet you there. We shall have a merry, merry time, for all of our friends will be there. It will be an intellectual center, for no one understands the income tax law except persons who do not have sufficient intelligence to understand the questions that arise under it." Whew. Where's Senator Root when we need him? Well, we have a few people in government today. Ron Paul's one of them that recognizes problems with the income tax. He would be in favor of getting rid of it because it's just non-productive. It's counterproductive. Okay, we need another show up here. I apologize for turning around. I usually have a screen here that I can see. I didn't know it was going to be like this. But, all right, thank you, George. John Adams said, "Liberty cannot be preserved without general knowledge among the people." That's similar to a quote we had earlier. Mark Twain, you probably don't expect him here, as irreverence is the champion of liberty, its only defender. You know, people that stand up for their rights can be very belligerent, can't they? They almost have to be, because 99% of the people think you should be waiving your rights. You know, you get out of a university in this country, we're the best educated people in the world, but you get out of a university, and even the university students sit there and they can't believe that you would even question government. What are they being taught in these universities? Not anything about law or rights, certainly. Now, for those not in California, you know, you're going to be happy to probably go home and get out of this state as soon as possible, but I just want to give you an idea of what I put up with here. Even the criminals here, I mean, they're, you know, this is the land of fruits and nuts, as you may know. And this is a true story, too. But this guy was running from the police. This is some of the criminals here in California. He was running from the police, and he decided, well, I'm going to stop here, and I'm running. He was out in the wooded area. Eventually, he said, I'm going to run. So he pulled his car over and jumped over the fence and run through the woods. It was dark out, and he had dark clothes on. He figured, I would just get away. There's only 2 cops, no dogs or helicopters or anything. So he's running around, sneaking around through the woods. And no matter where he went, the cops were honing in right in on him and finally caught him. And he finally, well, what happened? He says, and the cops were laughing at him because he's got those sneakers with the little lights on them. Yeah, well, anyway. That has no moral. It's just funny. Free Enterprise Society. We do have a membership. We founded in 1985 a Free Enterprise Society to help work together to get some money and get some research done on these issues and help expose, you know, actually to educate people on their rights and also to try to get some corrections on the income tax primarily. So if you're a member of Free Enterprise Society, you get an official membership card. You get to attend regular meetings at no additional charge. You get an FES newsletter, which we come out 6 times a year talking about some of the research and developments that we're doing, and our own researchers and paralegals write articles for that. You get an FES handbook talking about the different things that we have, services that we have through Free Enterprise Society. Eligible for optional programs. Verified ID program, which I'll talk about briefly. And knowledge that you're supporting an important cause. This is $55 a year, and that goes a long way to helping us get more radio, get television. I mean, that's what we're trying to do, reach people. This is the national, or the ID that we put together. One of the reasons I put this together, because in 1999, I don't use a driver's license. In 1999, The sheriff deputy did not like that I did not have a driver's license. So he arrested me, and he arrested my car. And the car was very scared. But anyway, we sued the officer for a long time. And what came out of it is this ID. Now, if you get one of these, it'll be a little different. It'll have your picture on it, and it'll be small enough to fit in your pocket. The back of it talks about a case, People versus Monroe, and also must accept it as satisfactory. And we encourage you to talk to the city or district attorney. Now, we came up with this as a result of my case and the depositions, because the ID that I did carry was, I made it myself, and the officer didn't like it, but it was not false or fraudulent ID of any type. They kept saying I need government issue ID. And the county attorneys in the lawsuit kept bringing cases, or at least a few cases, to our attention, but the word government wasn't in there. I need picture ID, that's all it said. It didn't say government issued picture ID. But anyway, we believe we're trying to combat the national ID. This is kind of a national ID, but it's a privately issued national ID. And we issued this since 2001. So we're hoping to kind of grandfather that in. I don't know if that'll work out, but it's interesting. Yeah. What happened? I can start it up again. Well, this battery didn't last long. Okay, we have a support service. You can bring them up. Helps you help yourself deal with IRS or franchise tax board problems. If you don't file returns, they're going to send you letters. Really ominous letters like, Mr. Jones, we don't have a record of receiving your tax return. And we need to answer that, and we can help you do that. Initial consultations by appointment, state-of-the-art research tools, help with other government agencies besides tax agencies. If you have questions about it, we may be able to help you with it, or we may know someone that does that kind of work. We even had calls about dog licenses, whatever. If you get upset about it, maybe we can help you with that. Paralegal assistance or returning referrals. Charge only when you use the service. And if you're not sure about a situation, if it's dealing with government, give us a call. This is $60 a year to be a member. Okay? The Legal Defense Fund will pay for the defense on failure to file. Failure to file income tax returns, have you ever heard of that? You might read about it in the springtime. People actually are in jail because they don't file returns. You've heard that too, I suppose. But I think it's totally ridiculous. Failure to do anything. If you look up the word commit means to do something. Commit a crime, you need to do something. You hurt someone or steal something. When you're accused of failure to file, what are you accused of? You're accused of doing nothing. How stupid is that? Not only doing nothing, but doing nothing on April 15th. And the jury buys it. Man, this guy did nothing on April 15th. We're sending him to jail. Yeah. Or if you've been a non-filing, you talk to your friends and neighbors, they say, you're going to go to jail. See, everybody thinks that. But we've actually been successful in a lot of our cases. Assistance if you're charged with failure to file, this fund will help with that. If you're charged with filing a false or fraudulent W-4 form, pays for an attorney, and then maybe this is working, try supporting those members in the courts. We'll pay for the attorneys if needed, pay for the entire defense. This fund helps everyone by making the way easier for others. By having the money to support a case, and especially if we win it, it makes the government less likely to take it, because they don't take it because they're mad at you personally. They do it because they want public education. They want something in the paper where they're winning. You understand? This is all fear and intimidation to them, isn't it? You can tell by the size of this crowd. This is $950 initial fee, and then it's $540 a year or $50 a month. Some people you may know that have won cases: Vernie Kuglin out of Memphis, FedEx pilot, did not file returns. The jury said not guilty not too long ago. Tom Cryer, you're going to hear from him tomorrow. What I like about his case he's an attorney. He's the first attorney that I know of won a case like this. A normal, if you're not an attorney and you're in a case of failure to file, you can get away with some things in front of the jury. Like, well, yes, you study the law, you study a case, you came to a conclusion, but you're a carpenter, you're not a lawyer, so they give you some benefit of the doubt for making a stupid decision, see? And maybe you can win a case that way, but an attorney cannot do that. He had to go right at him and say, hey, I made money, so what? I'm not liable for the taxes. And the jury didn't really agree with that so much, but what they did do is believe Tommy believed it. And that was the issue for the jury. So they gave him a not guilty verdict. Joe Bannister, former IRS criminal investigating agent, he's also here this weekend. He looked at these issues, couldn't find a problem with them. He put in a question to his bosses in Washington, D.C., and they did not answer the questions. They asked for his resignation. They recently charged him with felonies, trying to put him in jail, and he got not guilty. The jury did not even understand why Joe was in the trial. The charges were so weak. We've had a few cases in California. Gene Lamson, Des Lamson, and Phil D. overturned on appeal. You know you have a right to counsel. We take it a step further. We believe you have a right to competent counsel. Is there a difference? Well, it sure is. You know, you can hire an attorney for $50,000. He said, you know you're required to file. Is he competent? No. He's going to lose the case for you. But anyway, what we do with these three people, they got continuances from the judge looking for competent counsel. They kept looking and looking. Either they're too high priced or they think they're going to lose. They're not competent. The judge gets mad at this after a while, after a year or so, and sends them through trial without counsel, without them waiving counsel. In California, that's an automatic reversal. Bruce Anderson with the San Jose, California, was acquitted on all counts, proving a negative. If there's scientists in here, you'll figure it out. One of the main things the prosecution has to prove in a failure to file case is that you did not file, that you did nothing. How do they do that? Most patriots get on the stand and say, I didn't file and I'm proud of it. Well, that's okay, except that's like 90% of the prosecution's case. You do have a Fifth Amendment not to speak. So if you don't tell them, how are they going to figure it out? They're going to put an agent on the stand and says, well, I looked at the computer and there's no return on the computer. Does that prove you did not file? Maybe they didn't type it on. Maybe you mailed it and it was lost. Can they say no? Oh, yeah, that could have happened. Maybe your agent got it and didn't type it on correctly. Could that have happened? Sure. You know, there's a million other things. You know, we know the IRS flushes things to get their quotas done and stuff. Maybe it was flushed before you put it on the computer. Well, anyway, if there's a scientist in the room, you know that's proving a negative. That's a virtual impossibility. We put the prosecution in that position and the jury not guilty. Now, the jury did say, we believe this person was required to file, and we believe that he did not file, but the prosecution never proved that he did not. But we've had other cases, too, where the jury would hug the defendant. When they really get to know the person, they're in tears that the government would put these people, find people through the trials when we get acquittals. And when we can actually show our side of the story, it does not fare very well for government, because it's not a matter of us knowing more than the law. We just ask them for the law. Before I file and pay, I want to know what law does it. And you keep it simple, and it works in front of the jury. Robert Pierce of Michigan, all IRS counts dismissed, and this was a speedy trial case. I'm running out of time. The government and IRS have 70 days. Once it's over 70 days, you get a dismissal on speedy trial. Brad Lager, all felony counts dismissed. In this case, yeah. There's Brad Lager. Yes, that's the case we're talking about. It's a very good case. In another case, they lied to the grand jury, and I think this was your case. One case got dismissed. It was there's in front of the grand jury. Now, it's not failure to file. In fact, failure to file is not a crime. People think that, but it's really willful failure to file. Willful means bad intent or evil motive. They have to prove, the government has to prove that in your mind you committed a crime when you did nothing. Bad intent. So this grand jury member, one of them was pretty smart. He said they were talking about willful failure and bad intent. And the one grand jury member said, well, what would not be willful? And the IRS agent piped up and said, well, if the person were unconscious. And the U.S. attorney agreed. And that's a lie. I mean, if you're unconscious, you're not having any thought, are you? And when the judge saw that, he dismissed the complaint. We have a total of 25 wins. That's about 2/3 of our cases. So they can be beat. And even if you're filing returns, a lot of members are members of our legal defense fund to support those in the courts and support what we're doing. Because if we have enough money, we can win a lot more cases. Unfortunately, the legal system takes money. But they can be beat. Abraham Lincoln said, to sin by silence when the ship protests makes cowards of men. I think that's true. Most people, it amazes me how few people want to have integrity. Joe Bannister stood up and lost his job over this. And other people have done the same thing. Okay. Joan of Arc, I got to hurry now. Some people get mad at me, but I don't think you will. I think she's one of the most influential women in our history. She led the largest army in the world at the time. And anyway, there's all kinds of stories about her. She would be wounded heavily where they expect her to die. They're even digging a grave. By morning, she's dead. And then she gets up in the morning with not even a scar. Off she runs. Or she would be leading her army, and they'd come upon an enemy force much larger than theirs, and even their commanders would say, we should come back another day. And she pulls her sword and runs at them like a maniac. And her soldiers are loyal to her and followed her, and they'd win. They'd win. Many stories like this. But this is something she said, because the founders of our country, if they acted like the people today, we would still be England. Here's what she said. When we move, God will move. I direct this at the churches because a lot of churches say, oh, you don't have to do it. You can turn your back on it. We have grace. And they have all kinds of excuses for not standing up for the truth today. And it bothers me. But anyway, I've enjoyed my time. They're about to put the cane out on me. We do have well, got a special today. If you want to join the Free Enterprise Society, it's $45 instead of $55, and we can do it with no money down. Just give us the application or applications that you want, and you can join the support service on the Legal Defense Fund. We have a lifetime that's $1,200. We have it for $1,100. Again, we don't need money down. We can just take that and offer that discount without any money down. Legal Defense Fund is normally $995. Today is $795 and tomorrow. Sign up with the application, no money down, for $795, and make payments to get into it. If you're a non-filer, this is something you should be in. If you like what we're doing, you may want to support us financially also. And after 3 months, you got the $50. The quick moral to the story is we want you to make informed decisions. This person had good taste in motorcycles and certainly had enough money to buy a good one. But if you don't know how to ride, you ought to get a motorcycle with an engine that's not stronger than the brakes until you know how to ride the thing, you know. So when it comes to filing, not filing, I'm not pushing you to not file returns. But if you do or are doing that, we'll stand right beside you and work with you as best we can. Important. This covers only the beginning. You need to do your own study and try to prove me wrong. That's kind of the fun of it. Don't take my word for these things. You got to do your own investigation. That's very important. And if you're watching this on the web or view, you can get us at Free Enterprise Society, www.freeenterprisesociety.com, or on our phone number. You can call us anytime. We can send you a free information package. And here's other websites real quick. Truthattack.org is Tommy Cryer's website. Joe Bannister, Freedom Above Fortune, and Fully Informed Jury Association and Fiji.org are very fine educational sites that you would probably like. We don't need, well, you can sign up on the mailing list out there. But this is our catalog, and you can pick these up. They're free, and the applications are in here. They tear out. You can join one or more of our programs. Even if you're a member already, you can get that discount. We don't need any money down. And if you got some friends or neighbors you think might be interested in this before you leave, take all these you want. We got a lot of them, and they're free handouts, and they're very educational in themselves. But I am sorry, I'm out of time. I really appreciate you coming out, and I'm honored to be here, and I'll be glad to talk to you through the weekend. Thank you very much.